Well, hello and welcome to the Faith Roundtable. This is a series and production of the Faithful Politics podcast, where we're talking to faith leaders, scholars, and theologians about the most pressing issues that the church in America is facing today. And on this episode, we have the distinct honor and privilege, especially an honor for me, to have Pastor Greg Ford, one of a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, and also my cousin. But he is so much beyond that. He's a great leader. He's the founder and lead pastor of One Church in Columbus, Ohio. And this church streams its services weekly on its website. It's committed to igniting a movement to reach a disconnected culture for Christ in Columbus, Ohio, and around the world. Greg, so good to have you on the program today, dude. Thank you for joining us.
Josh, man, it's an honor to get a chance to do this, man. We've had a bazillion conversations with no camera, no mic, no nothing. So this shouldn't be too hard, right? Just do what we do. Let's just talk.
Yeah, man, absolutely, absolutely. So, dude, I know it's currently Good Friday right now at the recording of this episode, Good Friday, March 29th, 2024. So I'll just go ahead and start with this, man. Number one, I know it's big love for you to interview me or be on an interview in Easter week, dude. So we got Easter coming up here. We're recording right now on March 29th, 2024. So talk to me. How are things going at One Church? What are you guys gearing up for? And what are you excited about in this season?
Yeah, man. Thanks for asking. It's good. Easter is a big time, for churches because for whatever reason in our culture, I guess probably around just the fact that it's a national holiday, people are abnormally open to going to church. And so people who maybe invited a friend or family member and they're like, yeah, someday, I'll go. Well, for whatever reason, Easter, people are open more than ever. So, we just want to do everything we can to be really hospitable, and we consider the church like, what is a church? In our mind, it's the body of Christ. And so it should feel like coming in contact with Jesus as best we can. And so we want to do that. And then also I don't underestimate, the impact of intersecting God's word in the lives of people, like where they're at in their lives. So I know there's going to be a lot of people,
Yeah, man.
not just at our church, but yours and many, many others that, for whatever reason decide to step in those doors and are in a particular place in their life, and God's word can really impact them. So we really try to maximize that, and we kind of plan it months out. And so just want to be faithful to do our part, not do too much, but not do too little.
Yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we're gearing up for our Easter too. It's exciting. And we're going to have a lot of different, actually, kind of people from different faiths at our event. And it makes me kind of think about one thing that I know you guys have done really well there at One Church is balancing cultural relevance and theological integrity. And I'd love for you to kind of talk about, like, how can the church balance the need to be culturally relevant and yet maintain faithfulness to the scripture, maintain faithfulness to, the theological integrity, not bend on the truth necessarily, but be able to engage this culture that is increasingly not Christian in its outlook.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that's a long, long answer to that, but I'll kind of take a crack and try to summarize it. And if I get long-winded, feel free to cut me off or, give me
You're good, man.
Okay. So I think it really starts with kind of exegeting or dissecting, understanding both the culture that we live in and then the culture of whatever place you happen to be in the Bible, right? So the Bible was written, I think it's over like 1,500 years, if I remember right. Like it's about that span of time. So you're talking about, it kind of follows the nation of Israel, but there's just a lot of contextual nuance of each part, like the genre of the book, what's going on in the nation at the time. Are they in captivity? Are they in freedom? If they're in captivity, captivity to who? Okay, what is what's going on? So I think like if you jump into a book of the Bible, understanding that as best you can, knowing that context, and then knowing our context and looking at that, finding some similarities, so comparing and contrasting, and making sure that we're doing the best we can to do that accurately. Because I think one of the ways to mishandle the Bible would be to just make assumptions about context, to make assumptions that what we're
Mm,
going through, what they're going through is the exact same. So when I read these words on this page, it's saying to me what it was saying to them. And so I think it takes a little bit extra study. I think it causes you to maybe go a little bit slower, to dig a little deeper, and to really maybe put your own sort of presuppositions aside in terms of what you want it to say, what you're hoping it'll say, and really kind of approach it almost more like a detective. Like, I'm not showing up to this scene wanting something to be true. I'm showing up to the scene to find out what happened. And when I do that and I can kind of
mm,
tell that story, now we start to figure out what is relevant to us. What was meant specifically for the Corinthians, and what kind of also applies to us, and then maybe even more so beyond what does the text say or command of this group of people, but what is the Bible, or what is specifically Jesus trying to teach us about how to think? Because I think when you look at like thinking patterns and kind of a way of looking at the world and looking at God, now we can kind of take that and go, how does that apply to this context? So I think we got to be careful we don't just kind of find a verse that says something that we kind of want to say, and then boom, now I've got a sermon on it and I'm calling it culturally relevant. I think you got to understand the both cultures, so you know what's the same, what's different, so that we can present this thing in a way that's really helpful.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. I'd love to like dig in even just more in our conversation about how do we exegete our culture. I mean, I think we get a lot of training in Bible college, and pastors get a lot of training on exegeting the Bible. And even that, of course, like that's difficult. And we always need to get sharper in that. And that's one thing you and I do all the time in conversations we have. But how do we exegete our culture? And I'm even thinking like, the younger generations, like it's always been this thing, right, between older and younger generations. Well, the younger generation, they're not holy enough. They need an experience with the Holy Spirit. They need this and that, which I'm not even saying that any of that is not true, but it's like, it's almost like we have these pat answers sometimes to like, hey, let's just do the same thing again. And that worked back then. So there's this assumption it's going to work now. And I know that you guys have done a great job in getting younger generations, people that are kind of in maybe that millennial generation and even younger than that. So how do we exegete this culture, and how do we minister effectively to young generations without just recycling the same stuff and thinking that's going to work again?
Yeah, man, great question. So I think when we talk about exegeting the culture, okay, so that, what do we mean by culture, right? So culture is obviously has to do with the year we live in, the fact that we're a globalized culture, but it's also, I live in Ohio, you live in Virginia, you live in a specific
Yeah.
city, I live in a city, we work in specific places. So you're dealing with a lot of like subcultures. The family that you grew up around,
Yeah.
is your area primarily influenced by one group of people or one tribe, or is it a kind of a melting pot? Is it a racially, culturally diverse place? That's going to affect your own subculture. So I think like when we're thinking about the culture of whether it's the United States of America or the Midwest or the South or the West Coast or whatever it might be, I think you got to kind of go, what are we looking at here? So I think you've got what are macro trends that have impacted our world, whether it's the digital information age, the digital revolution, how consumers consume, how people behave that's different, if, we're both old enough to remember when you went to an airport and you sat there and nobody had their face in their phones, right? Like
Yep.
you actually saw people walking around reading magazines or something like that. Now it's, go sit at, Terminal B, whatever, watch. It's just everybody's in their phone. Okay,
Everybody.
so that's all cultural, right? That's part of the world that we live in. And so I think being a student of that, I think doing a lot of observation carefully, contemplating like what you see, having meaningful, substantive conversations and listening to people, reading, observing what people are kind of saying about, and learning and synthesizing and understanding, where we're at and how that impacts where we're going. So I think just being a good listener is a big part of it, being observant. I also think, man, like, I think it's kind of related to the answer I gave a moment ago about really understanding the context of the Bible and knowing what's being said and what message is being sent, what the author wanted us to know about what they were doing, and even looking at some of the circumstantial evidence and the things that aren't being said and the things that aren't being done. I think when you get there, with the Bible and you keep going there, you start realizing what battlefields are worth dying on, what hills are worth dying on, what are the things that you're like, man, this is
That's good.
good and evil. Like this really is like, this is something we've got to fight, or this is just something that's sort of, it's a change. It's irritating my comfort level. It's unfamiliar, so it's uncertain, and therefore it's just agitating me. And then I do think there are some fairly predictable patterns in human beings as we age. So I'm 43, about to turn 44. I definitely, although I consider myself young enough that I've got years ahead, but I find myself struggling to stay flexible emotionally around certain changes. I see whether it's AI or robots and again, phones. Like I talked about, just everybody being their phone. It's like my
Yes.
15-year-old daughter and her friend are sitting next to each other in their phones, and I'm like, what the heck? I kind of go old man on them. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Whenever you're not together, you're texting each other, and now you're together and you're on your phones, and they're like, we're texting each other.
They're
I'm like,
texting
what?
each other right next to each
Yeah,
other.
like sitting next to each other. So there's a part of me that's like, this is wrong, this is bad. Well, is it? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think you need to take time though to not just go, well, it's foreign to me, it's different to me, it's not what I grew up with, therefore it's bad or wrong or whatever. You got to have the discipline to kind of step back, really think about it, talk about it, consider it with other minds and people that you respect. And that way, I think you find out what are the things as a church, what are things as a family that I'm going to go in and I'm going to fight tooth and nail for this thing, man. I'm going to stand up and thump the pulpit. And which things are like, no, it's
Yeah.
okay. That is a part of, progression, So, and I think, I know you're a lot of your world, man, is working in politics and you're a great thinker, great mind. You're one of the people I love to consider things with. But
Thanks,
as
brother.
you know, right, like the whole power of this thing is sitting in the tension between those two things. What do we need to conserve
Yeah.
and what do we need to progress? And it's a tension you got to live in. You don't pick one or the other fully. I think it's a mistake to go, no, everything's progress, and then you end up blowing something up that really was precious and needed to be preserved and conserved. But then if you're always in defense mode and you're conserving everything, then we fall so far behind. It puts everybody and everything at risk, and it, creates drag when we need to step into new stuff. So I think you got to sit in that tension. And I think some of it is surrounding yourself with people maybe who you line up value wise, but you might have different points of view. You might some come to the table naturally more future minded, more progressive, more
Yeah. Yeah.
of a innovator or creator. mindset, and others have a more conservative mindset by nature. But if we share values and we're all using our brains and showing our perspectives and listening well and speaking well, I think you're kind of working your way to that, exegeting the culture and starting to come to some conclusions, circle certain problems, and I think get to a better place.
Dude, that's so good. I love that. I was thinking as a connection to this, my the YouTube presence that I have through the podcast and everything, it far extends my current my current reach with the people just coming to my church. Now it's much deeper, right? With people coming to my church, it's probably much more effective. But my digital YouTube, that extends my reach a lot. And so I think about that a lot. Like, how do we minister in a digital age? And how do we use digital platforms for ministry? And so I would love to get your thoughts on how we actually, like, how you guys are using your digital platforms. How you feel like the future, like now and in the next, year or so, and even coming time, like, how do we use digital platforms for ministry without losing the essence of community and personal connection that, we feel like is so vital to having a church that is that's effective. How
Yeah.
do we use these digital platforms?
Yeah, man. So, great question. I have a few thoughts. I mean, there's probably people doing better than we are at this who could probably give you even better answer than this. But kind of the approach we take is we look at as all the platforms and we go, what is sort of the psychology of the end user on each platform? So I think, it's kind of like the design thinking process where you kind of start with empathy for the end user. So when somebody goes to Instagram,
Hmm.
what are they doing? What are they trying to accomplish? Why would they go there? They go to YouTube. And of course, it's not one size fits all. It's not one answer, but I think each platform tends to attract probably a certain psychographic or demographic, right? Probably more than demographic, psychographic, which is
Hmm.
psychographics, basically just people who have a certain way of thinking aligned in terms of values and interests and things like that beyond their demographic
That's
differences.
good.
They think this way. So someone that spends a lot of time on Instagram, or like what are they going there for? Are they wanting to watch a 30-minute sermon? Or they want to watch a 5-minute soundbite or a 1 minute? No. People that go there are usually just they're just boom, 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 quick thumb. So
Yes.
10-15 second soundbite, right? If somebody going to YouTube, probably more likely to listen for 8 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And then people going to podcasts, they're on the podcast platforms. I mean, they may settle in for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, some of these are really long. So I think it's like understanding each platform, understanding the psychology of the end user. Why are they there? What are they trying to get? And then kind of meeting that need there, and then also making them aware. So when they're in a different mood, when they're not in the 15-second mood, they're in the 1 hour mood, they're
Hmm.
aware of how they can, slide into this other platform and find you. And, we see it a lot. We'll put a 10-second clip on Instagram or something, right? And, you'll have, it's always funny. Like there's these, I don't know if they're just trolls or they just misunderstand or whatever. They'll go on and be like, this guy says he's a pastor. He never talks about the Bible. It's like, dude, it's a 10-second clip. Like I talk about the Bible, 50
We
weeks a
talk
year,
about it a lot, dude.
yeah, dude. It is not hard to find, you can go to the website and watch the whole thing, and I'll wear you out, with Bible. But again, it's this clip. And then often people will go, where can I see the whole thing? And so that's our job then, to be able to link them over here. And, but not everybody wants that. Some people, they're just wanting a quick hit of inspiration or encouragement or entertainment or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's kind of what we try to do, is just match each platform psychology the best we can. build out the ecosystem. So, I mean, we're doing okay at it. We could do a lot better. We're always trying to learn and improve.
Yeah, dude, that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking about how, the Gospels, when they were writing the Gospels, these were documents that were made in a medium that they were made to be read. They were made in a medium that the people around them understood and that would connect with the audience that they had. And they so like the gospels were made to be connecting with an audience in a relevant way. And I think about that with like, how do we take what we currently have, how do we take our current, like what's working now with people, and how do we connect with them in a way that is relevant to them, just like they did in the first century. And I know social media is one of those things that it presents challenges and opportunities. What do you feel like the challenges and opportunities are for social media in the church? Because it feels like if a church isn't on social media in some way now, then I don't know what that means for them. But what are the challenges and opportunities do you feel like social media presents to the church today, and how do we use them? How do we use them most effectively?
Yeah. So I think the paradigm shift for me since like the inception of social media, when it first came out, it was this like to have, or, like to have, or maybe you don't want to have it. And it was like an app that, if, kind of maybe self-indulgent app where you put your profile out there, and it's a thing for kids or something, right? And so people thought of it as an app, but I think the reality is at this point it's a community. It's where people spend their time. So if you
Mm,
were pastoring a physical church like I am, especially 20 years ago, you would have tried to find what are the hubs in the community, right? Well, there's a community center over here. There's a YMCA. There's a farmer's market. There's guys that play pickup basketball at the park. There's a parade that they do every so often. They have these events, and you'd have gone and become a presence at those places. You'd have put a float in the parade. You'd have played basketball with the guys. You'd have showed up at the farmer's market and just started meeting people, right?
yeah.
And that still works. I mean, that's still a thing because people do physical events and you're building relationships. But I think you have to kind of think of social media as that same thing, right? It's like there's a community, there's events going on, there's activity, conversations being had. And so in some ways it's a community with different hubs. And so I think to kind of get your voice in there, to get your presence in there, ultimately, so that you can connect people within the body of Christ and point people to Jesus, right? So you think about a good, I think, comparison would be like John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist, he says, I'm not the light. I'm Jesus is the light.
Mm,
John the Baptist, even when they were leaving him to go to Jesus, he's like, good, please do. Like, that's my whole
yeah.
point.
Yeah.
I'm not the light. I'm a reflection of the light. I'm a reflector of the light. And so when you look at me, I'm deflecting you ultimately to Jesus, right? That's the plan. And so I think with what we do with social media, yeah, we might start out giving a piece of leadership content, or we might start off giving something about families or something about relationships, something about marriage, something that's going to help you kind of in some way. But ultimately what we want to do is point you to Jesus. And not every single post, not every single piece of content is going to be John 3:16. Not every single piece of content is going to
Right.
be the four spiritual truths, or what. It's not going to all be that. It's going to be other things. But guess what? That's what Jesus did, right? He did other things. He met needs. He fed people. He you know healed people. He went through like physical things, met practical
Yes.
needs, and gave value, right? Even the disciples, right? Like the first disciples, they're fishermen. What's the first thing he did? he filled their nets with fish. He gave them like the best catch of their lives, like almost it like stretched their infrastructure. They almost ripped their nets out. And so he's giving them this. And then he's like, you know what? Let's go fish for people. You think that was cool? Wait till we start seeing people's lives change, right? But he met a need, or he met them where they were. So that's kind of the same approach, that we have. And that I think social media, it's not just this self-indulgent thing. It could be that, like it could become that.
Sure. Sure.
It could become something that becomes very superficial, but that's everything. A physical church with
Yes.
a temple and a steeple and a stained glass and whatever, all their liturgies can become very, very surface. They could, something that
Yes.
looks traditional and ancient can become just as superficial as the glossy new thing. It's really, how we use it and what's going on in our minds and hearts. So that's kind of our approach. We're like, hey, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, these different platforms, they're communities and people are hanging out there. So if they're hanging out there, we
Yes.
want to be hanging out.
That makes a lot of sense, man. I one of the things that social media does now is it actually makes this spread of information, both good information and bad information. It takes information and it spreads it out over a wide area, and people get it. And we've seen the political issues, and I like people talking and information spreading, people gathering into political cliques online. And I want to shift a little bit and talk about like how we navigate the political discussion, how we navigate this next election season as churches. And how do you feel like, just as a broad question, what do you feel like, and how do you feel like churches should navigate political discussions in a way that promotes unity rather than division?
Well, that's a good question. I probably want to give a couple disclaimers up front. One would be the answer I give here. I wouldn't pretend to say that I'm the person to determine how everyone should handle politics. I tend
Sure.
to be pretty gracious in terms of people's approach. I'll share a few thoughts that I think are maybe better than others in terms of kind of our approach, but I do think people have to kind of start in their context. So context matters. I know I've mentioned that now a couple times, but like I look at our church, right? We're in Columbus,
Yeah.
Ohio. So we are in the heart of a swing state. So when it comes to a presidential election in particular, it's like hot and heavy. And our church is very diverse, culturally, racially, generationally, and I would say politically. If I had to guess, we've never done a poll, but if I had to guess,
Sure.
I mean, we're probably darn near 50-50 in terms of people who are going to vote Republican or Democrat. So it's pretty much
Mm,
there. So I have to kind of know, like, what is my
yeah.
ultimate goal? Like, am I trying to drive people to the polls? Is that where is that what I think the ultimate good is going to come from? Not that I would ever discourage anyone from to vote. I encourage them to. I vote. I think everyone should vote. That's an awesome right that we have in this country. I think we should take advantage of it and do our civic duty. But in terms of like, do I see a candidate winning ultimately is what's going to usher into the world the things that I think Jesus wants us to bring into the world, and it's going to primarily come through that. No, so to me, it's not like
Hmm.
where I'm going to find the battlefields I'm looking to die on, or where I'm not willing to polarize people over these things. Like to me, it's like I'm looking for opportunities to bring people together. So in terms of like what's the right format to have political discussions, I mean, I think a lot of it's changed and is changing, right? So like for example, we had a guy in the last election in our church, a guy I love, who was like, "Hey man, you need to hand out these voter guides, at church." And basically it has
Hmm.
the two candidates and it's everything that they voted on. and where they stand on these issues and this and that. And this guy clearly had a candidate he was pulling for, but it was like,
Sure.
but he's saying, look, this isn't even us pushing anyone. It's just us giving this to people. Right. And I think my dad used to do that. And I know one of the churches I work for in the day used to do that. And so I think at a certain
Sure.
point, maybe 20 years ago, you needed to do that because people didn't know. They didn't know what this person voted for this thing or that thing or the other. I think at this point in the information age, man, like that stuff is so out there. It's so easily accessible. I'm not like meeting an unmet need by doing that.
Right.
I think people can find it. Like if you don't want to know what the two presidential candidates, where they stand on issues, then you really don't want to know because
Sure.
it's all there. Like, I mean, all you got to do is log on, right? And it's there, Google search. So in terms of like just informing people and stuff like that, I think that information's out there. I don't know that they're coming to me for that. I don't know that I need to be the guy to be giving that. Now that being said, I don't have a problem with someone who does. If they go, hey, our context, maybe people aren't on the internet very much or whatever it might be. Maybe they do give those things out. I also think like nowadays, other formats other than the Sunday sermon. So think about this.
Yes.
If you're pastoring a church, you're preaching on Sundays, everyone that shows up to that message and brought their family or brought their friends or brought a guest, they are trusting you to pick the topic. They're trusting you to pick the topic. They showed up.
That's true, man.
On Sunday or Saturday night or whenever they came, and they don't even know what you're going to talk about.
No.
And they're going to not only let you pick the topic, they're going to let you do all the talking. They're not going to let you do that for very long if you keep picking topics that they don't want to hear about and you keep talking and running off. Okay, now somebody might go, well, that you're just being soft, you're being weak. No, I think if you search your own heart, you'd go, I wouldn't go listen to that. So in my mind, if I go, hey, courageous leadership is just pushing people away who don't think like me on hot topics or tough hot takes. Okay, then that's your definition. Then go ahead and make that bed and lay in it. That's not my approach. My approach is if I was going to have a conversation that was polarizing, I would have a conversation. I'm not going to stand up and just monologue.
That's really good.
I would do something like this, right? I mean, my wife and I started our own little podcast. Like, and part of it was to have a landing place for conversations that might not be ideal for the Sunday monologue.
I love that.
And to welcome in, like, I salute you, Josh, and I salute your partner in what you guys have done because you come from different sides. You bring in people and you listen of somebody who you may not agree with right away. And this is what I would say, dude, in terms of how I think. And that's kind of what you're asking, right? So
yes, I want to know how you think, brother.
Yeah, this is how I think is when somebody has a difference of opinion on something that I believe or that I think I believe, I don't immediately jump to defensiveness or that they are wrong. Now, I don't automatically just take on their belief as my own.
Yeah.
But I'm going to start with the curiosity that maybe they see something I don't see. Maybe they know something I don't know. Maybe there's a level of complexity to this topic that I'm overlooking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen. And you do this so well. You do this well on your podcast, but you do this well in life in general. You open up your thought. You go, hey, ask really good questions. You don't turn it into hand-to-hand combat. You don't turn it into a big fight. You're going, hey, maybe you know something I don't know. Ask questions and listen.
Yeah.
So if I was gonna, enter into these types of conversations, I wouldn't turn it into a Sunday monologue. I'm very careful about what I'm going good and evil. Like, see, if you vote this way, you're good. If you vote that way, you're evil. If you vote for him or her, you're good. If you vote for him or her, you're evil. I think that's making something binary. It's polarizing in things that are frankly way more complicated than that. Right. So I think the other piece too, man, I think is just a general acknowledgement of like some pretty obvious things. But I think to acknowledge like it is when you vote, particularly for president, right, which is kind of we're in this election year, but when you vote, it is a binary vote. It's a zero sum game. I don't get to vote for 20% of Nikki Haley and 15% of Joe Biden and 14% of Donald Trump and 16% of whoever, right? I don't get to do that.
Right.
And so often, like if you think of each human being as a pie chart in terms of what matters to them, we could talk more about that, but what matters to them, often, man, there are pieces of that pie that matter tremendously to that person. And it doesn't mean that, that piece, for example, I have 2 boys with autism. Okay. So if there's a levy going on in our community that's going to help special needs kids, that's going to increase everyone's taxes, I'm voting for it.
Right.
Because my kids are on the line. Now, before I had those kids,
sure,
if the levy came through, what would I have done? To be honest, I don't know, man. Depends on how my finances were doing. I might have been like,
sure, yeah.
Man, I got nothing against special needs families, man. I sympathize, but I can't have any more coming out of this check, man. So I don't have hard feelings if my neighbor doesn't vote for the levy. But the reality is I am voting for that levy because it hits really close to home. So I think when you look at every voter, they're going to vote for a candidate. They're going to vote for an issue. And a lot of it's going to have to do with how close it hits to home. And they might not like everything about it. The reason I say all this is because I think in our churches and sometimes in our rhetoric, we paint everybody with a broad brush. So if you vote for him or her or whatever, I have now taken you lock, stock, and barrel and put you in that category and camp. Whereas there's complex reasons to it. And I think if we can kind of go, everybody's a pie chart, different size pies and different things. If I've got a child in the military, okay, if I live in a certain region, if I'm impacted, again, what I'm going through economically, what sector I work in, I might go over here and there may be a piece of the pie that's really big to you that's not as big to me. And if you make that good and evil, I think that's unnecessary. I think it's inappropriate. I think it's counterproductive. I think it's not good for our country, our culture. So I think before we just start going good and evil on stuff, make sure it really is good and evil.
That's good.
Let's really dig down on that before we just start going there, because I think when you make it that really inflames it, and I think creates a lot of us versus them, which I think is pretty
Yeah, that totally. I love that answer because, I mean, we feel that all the time. We're in a very divided country right now, and a lot of it, it's funny, and I'll just make this really quick, but we interviewed Charlie Sykes on the podcast, and he's been a conservative radio personality for a long time, and then kind of became this, basically in his mind, he became a never Trumper. So we're not going to talk about, that too much, the idea of never Trumping or anything, or Trump or whatever it is. But one of the things he said was that, like, they're built, these things, these conservative radio shows and these liberal radio shows, talking heads, they're built to essentially, almost in some sense, radicalize people. They're built to put people into silos, to put them into camps where now they have to identify those camps. And identity is a huge part of this. And I'm curious, dude, like, what do you feel like even, and I guess I'm thinking about people prioritizing their Christian identity over other political affiliations and things like that. But what do you feel like is like the right way to preach? Like, are there issues to preach on? Or is it like what would be the right thing to preach on to address this thing, like our political climate to a mass audience? Like, and again, riff as much as you want,
Yeah.
it's not like you're committing to preaching something or something like that. But I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
what do you think would be the appropriate things to preach on?
Good question. So I'll start with this. I think preaching is a process. So it's not only what you say, but how you say it, and where your head is and where your heart is when you're saying it.
Mm.
So if you think about like Jesus talking about the Pharisees and everything, he's not necessarily harping on what they said. In fact, he says like a lot of what they say is good. He said you ought to listen to like the stuff that they're saying is good. But he's like ultimately inside what's going on in their minds and their hearts is really bad. So I think before I talk about anything, I've got to kind of do that work. I've got to go inside my mind and heart, and so you go, well, how do you do that? So I think for me, dude, the start is dealing with fear, because I think you talk about radicalizing and the tendency to radicalize. Well, what causes someone to become radical about something? What causes someone to go to extreme measures?
Mm.
It's fear, right? So, and this isn't like
Yeah,
rocket
man.
science. It's
Yeah.
not like some big secret. Like, how do you win an election? Well, you get people to vote. How do you get people to vote? Well, you've got to motivate them to go to actually show up
Yes.
or to mail it in or whatever they do. You got to motivate them. Well, how do you motivate them? Well, the most motivating, quickest way to do it is through fear. I
Yeah,
mean, fear
man.
is tremendously motivating. Like, if I'm afraid, man, I'll leap tall buildings in a single bound. There's
Yes,
no, yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. It'll get me up early, keep me up late. Like, I mean, fear is it burns hot and then it burns out. So, but it's like you can, if you keep inflaming fear, man, you can really get people to move. So I think when you look at, political pitches and everything, I mean, it's kind of what they have to do, right? Like they come out there and they go, "Hey, that person over there, that group of people is your worst nightmare." Okay. And they inflame that as much as they can. And then on the other side, to kind of appeal to your own desire for fulfillment. So to go, well, if you vote for me, man, I'll make you more fulfilled. I'll give you more. You'll have more. You'll be bigger, stronger, better. Okay, and we will as a country, and you will as an individual, and you will be tremendously insecure and unsafe if that person gets in. So, however they do it, that's what they're doing. So, if I'm going to get up and talk, right, in any format, whether it's this one, whether it's from the pulpit, whether it's me picking a topic, I need to be extremely in tune with my own fears to go, am I
Yes.
getting up here thumping something that really at the root of what's compelling me to get up here and to speak with intense rhetoric and passion and calling people to action and making this thing black and white and all this? Is at the root of this a personal fear that I have that's driving me there? Or is this really something that if my fear was taken away, I think is worth talking about? I think this needs to be talked about. I think there's a huge gap here. And then to look at, again, as the body of Christ, okay, what are the things in my role that are mine to do? And then really looking at, again, particularly my context, our people, what conversation needs to be had there. But I think often, man, when I see somebody, a pastor, on a Sunday or something up there really going hard on politics, one of the questions I'm asking myself is I wonder what their story is. I wonder what their core fears are. I wonder what things
Mm.
ultimately, right, are driving them to do that and what they're trying to accomplish. And is that ultimately what Jesus was doing, right? So I mean, I think I don't really ever have the goal to get people to vote for a specific person or group of people. I mentioned
Sure.
this earlier. I don't see
Yeah.
that as the solution. In my mind, it would be more about, trying to lead people in our context to do the things that Jesus did. And I mean, I guess I don't know, you're a great mind and Bible scholar, maybe I'm missing something like I don't really see Jesus getting super political in a time where I think he could have, for sure. I mean, he dealt with things like
Absolutely.
injustices and things that were wrong. And I was I was studying on the Sermon on the Mount. And, you have there's the text where he talks about turning the other cheek. And like,
Yeah.
hey, if a soldier comes up and he says, carry my gear for a mile, and he's like, carry it for two, right? And it kind of just a first reading of that, it almost feels like Jesus is enabling abusers, or is telling you that, you ought to be a doormat and just get run over.
Right.
But I think if you look at it more deeply, I don't think that's what he's saying. I think Jesus is ultimately saying there's, in your cultures and subcultures, you're always going to have abuse of sorts. You're going to have abuse of power. You're going to have haves and have nots. And sometimes the haves who seem powerful are going to the have nots. They're going to and saying, carry my stuff. And when you're the one being asked to carry the stuff, what do you do about that? Because it feels like
Hmm.
a catch-22. If I carry your stuff, then I'm giving into a bad system. But if I don't carry your stuff and I turn and I fight you right now, I probably get obliterated. And
Right.
Jesus is essentially saying your strength doesn't come from the system. Your strength doesn't come from being on top, politically. Your strength comes from inside, to where you go, a mile? Is that it? Is that all you got? I can do two. Boom, you hit me on the cheek. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be like my 9-year-old son, if he slapped me on the cheek, be like, is that all you got? Come on, man. To find a strength internally, that wherever you fall, whether your candidate made it or didn't make it, whether your country's on top or your country's not on top, you go, my strength is like, I can go 2 miles, I can go 3, I can go 4, I can go 5. Where does that come from? It doesn't come from my candidate. It doesn't come from, I look to the hills,
Yes.
where does my help come from? It comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. This is an inside job. I have a
Yes.
strength. I can turn the other cheek. I can carry it an extra mile. And it's not that I'm just being run over by a system. It's that I'm finding a strength that greater is he who is in me. So, I mean, dude, vote your conscience, man. Vote the things you believe in. Vote common sense. Do all that stuff, but don't make it a bigger deal than what it is. Don't make it a bigger deal than what it is. For me, if I came to the point where I had really talked it out, thought it out, prayed it out, looked at it from every
Yeah.
angle, and I felt like, man, I've got to say something, then absolutely I would. But usually in the process
Sure.
of listening and looking from different angles and thinking it all the way through, I go, you know what? This is really complicated. And it probably isn't, it's not able for I'm not able to get up there in 25 minutes, 30 minutes, the constraints of a Sunday morning. I'm probably not able to get up there and do this thing justice. That's just me. I mean, every so often, like, I mean, the other piece too is, again, back to your context. What's happening in your body, in your church? Like, so
Yes.
we had,
Yes.
after one of the elections, I think it was after the Donald Trump Hillary Clinton uh election, our church was really divided. And so I could feel it. Like, people were on social media
Mm.
sounding off here and sounding off there. And it was like, these are friends, but, and then I'm like, in the comments, I see like people like, I'm like, oh man, these guys they're part of the same church and they're eating each other up. So I did a message called "You Voted for Who?" And I did a whole
That's
message
good.
on that. But it was really more about, pastoring our church through how do we disagree. Alignment doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean
Yes,
that we agree on everything. You and your wife don't agree on everything, but you're aligned.
for sure.
You and I
Yes,
are, I mean, we're family, dude. We're aligned, but we don't agree on everything.
That's right.
So what are the things worth unfriending? And don't just unfriend because you're ticked, because you're emotional, because you're scared, because you're mad. Be a better person than that. Be a deeper person than that. Be more contemplative than that. So I had more, but it was really more about that than it was about politics. I talked about when the whole Roe v. Wade thing happened. Again, the same thing. Our church kind of went in an uproar, and I went in and talked about. I used some of Paul's writings and the epistles of, the church that was tearing each other apart, and Paul says, "Hey, I've heard you guys are about to disintegrate."
Yeah.
And he kind of calls them to unity. So I kind of talked about some of those things when the Supreme Court with the same-sex marriage thing, again, same thing. I took some time. I talked about it,
Right.
and in that one particularly, the approach I took was I did 3 weeks on it, and I talked about, and basically some of it. One of them I did an hour is pretty academic. It was just, here's what the Bible says, and here's
Right.
various ways of interpretation, because a lot of people make assumptions about, well, the Bible's very clear about this or that. Well, it's not always, and there's sometimes plausible interpretations beyond the one that you were given in your tradition or the one you think is open and
Right.
shut. And so I kind of put that out there and go, here's what what I believe after really thinking about it and praying about it and researching it. But I took a more academic approach on that one. So some of it's case by
That makes
case.
sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, dude. And one thing that I'm hearing that I love is that we think in process, right? It's like instead of just jumping to the conclusion, go to the process. Go to the process of your thinking. Interrogate your own thinking. And I love you're a great process thinker in like, hey, instead of just getting up and preaching on whatever, how about you start asking questions about what does my congregation need? What's really going on? What are they afraid of? What am I afraid of? Those are such excellent questions to ask that help us get out of this myopic, siloed view and start to see other people for who they are. And I just love that. And this is kind of like the last question I have. And I'd love for you to kind of talk about what are you hopeful for in the future of the church, and what are you concerned about in the future of the church in America? Kind of, and you can take those in whatever order you want, but what are you most hopeful for, and what are you concerned about when it comes to where you see the church kind of going in your context, and then even beyond in America?
Yeah. I'll start with what I'm concerned about. So I think like if I go back in time, let's say I wasn't 43 right now and I was 20 right now. I think a lot of
Hmm.
people who are 20 right now would go, hey, if I have some of the same maybe skills and um, passions that like I have, they would say, I'm going to just kind of be a social media personality. I'm going to start my own
Right.
page. I'm going to start my own conversations. I'm going to make content. I'm going to do all that and um, make money, make a living doing that, which now obviously you can like make a great living doing that. The part of my job that is the most taxing, exhausting is the community side of it in terms of building up our church
Yeah.
community. So our church is,
Yes.
thousands of people, and it's not just a gathering on Sunday for a monologue. It's supporting these people in walking through broken relationships, walking through death, and grief, walking through addictions, and then even those that don't have like kind of some of these extreme things, just being a human being, man. Like, how, if I didn't have a dad, how do I know how to be one? If I didn't see a husband in the home, how can I be one? So just being a community. So the community development side of it is extremely taxing. It's exhausting. And frankly, it gets you a lot of
Yeah, I feel that.
criticism. Like we get upset people like a lot. So there's no way to say it other than it's a huge headache, but it's a huge payoff
Yeah,
because it's like, why do we do it? Well, otherwise you and I are sitting here talking and it is a lot of great conversation, but it's just words until it
right.
shows up in community. So
Yeah,
my
that's good,
concern
man.
is, man, this next generation, are they going to be willing to pay the price of community building? Or do your people who have leadership
That's good.
talent and are good talkers and good content makers, they're just going to make content and not have the headache of the community, let it just sort of happen? Even like, frankly, like politics, you kind of go like, I've heard a lot of people like, man, I feel like we should have better candidates than we have and whatever. And it's like, what politics has become in terms of like, can you imagine like being in the middle of an election, having kids and what that would do? I mean, in the
No.
day, it was like, yeah, they put up with some stuff, but it was kind of pretty cool, president's kids or whoever. I mean, to put your family through that, to have to enter into what it is in terms of just this social media mayhem, three-ring
Yes.
circus. So you start to go, my concern is it's like, I'm trying to remember who, somebody awesome came up with this great quote. And it was like, bad times make strong men or women, strong people. Okay. Bad times make strong people.
Yes.
Strong people make good times. Good times make weak people. Weak people make bad times. Bad times
Yeah.
make strong people. Strong people make good times. Good times make weak people. Weak people make bad times. Bad times make strong people. So you go, is what's going to
And the
happen like with
cycle
the
goes.
church is people just they're tired of dealing with all that. We got a bunch of content makers, a bunch of YouTubers, a bunch of social media influencers, and nobody's building community because that's the tough work. And then I think my fear is that it would end up in crisis before then your leaders start going, all right, I'll do it. But often it's like it takes a bad time for somebody to step up.
Right.
So I think you're at some point going to have a lot of empty buildings. You're going to have a lot of churches that are kind of cease to exist and a bunch of people online, which isn't all bad, but I don't know that totally replaces humans being in the same place at the same time. So I mean, we'll see. Yeah, I think my hope comes around just the day we live in now. People just have better access to better information. And I think obviously that's a double-edged sword because they have more access to bad information also. It can be very, very confusing, of what information I should be listening to, which one, what I shouldn't. It's funny. It's like my wife and I was joking about like health and fitness content. It's like you listen to one and they're like, don't ever eat another carb, and then you listen to others, they're like,
Yes.
eat all the carbs in the world. It's just like, what in the, it's hard sometimes to know. I think again, for the church and the Bible, sometimes there's that same thing. You're like, man, is it saying this? Is it saying that? But I think there's just a lot of good teaching out there and better access to it. When I was growing up, even in the last 20 years, like I had one set of commentaries that I got from college, that I paid for. It's all I could afford. So I'm really getting
Right.
kind of one perspective on biblical interpretation. And now it's just so much easier to pull together various interpretations, be able to put them side by side and think about them and pray about them and discuss them. So I feel like I've learned more in the last few years than I did in my first couple decades of just, postgraduate learning. It's just, I feel like a student again. Frankly, I feel like a kid again in many ways. So I love that people have that. I
That's
just think
awesome.
the connectedness of social media and things like that makes the ability to communicate better. Like as a church, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, we have people from all over the world
that are connecting with what we're doing. We're connecting to each other. I mean, with just the basic tools that we have now, we're just able to have that broader reach. So I think that's exciting, for me, and I'm hopeful about it.
That's awesome, man. Well, dude, I love it. It's well said. And I really appreciate you coming on, Greg. It's been really great to have this conversation with you. Fascinating. Obviously, you and I could keep talking and I could keep listening, man. I think your answers are on point, and I think that those who are connecting here well, this is my last question. How can people check you out online? Where can they find more information about One Church, and how can they keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, so pretty easy. Our church website is just one.church. So it's not .com.org. They sell the domain .church now. So if you just go one.church, and then if you're interested in the messages, it's /messages, and it's not hard to find. And then frankly, like, we're trying to serve and help people as best we can through our ministries, even if they don't live in our city. So there's a lot of things there. Maybe if you're struggling through, that are some resources and support ministries that we have. So feel free to take a look and reach out. And then on social media, it's just our church handle is all spelled out, one.church. So ONEDOT church. And then mine is just Pastor Greg Ford on the various platforms.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, man, for being on. It was a great conversation. Love you big time, dude, and really can't wait to connect again. And to everyone who's joined us today, thank you for joining us. We'll be coming out with more content that you can check out. Make sure that you like and subscribe. God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See ya.